Y'all know what time it is. Creation time. Let's jump in with John and Jane, attempting to debunk human evolution while being more or less as scientifically illiterate as flat earthers.
Hi, John.
Hey.
Oh, hey, where'd this truck come from?
Up in the attic. I was cleaning it out earlier and I found it, and it's got a whole bunch of junk in here, but some of it is actually helping me with our science homework.
Hey, check this out. Oh, man. Oh, was this your grandpa's old yearbook?
Yeah, it must have been.
Look how out of date everyone looks. Was this really in style back then?
What the fuck was that noise? Oh, what a sad day to have ears.
Do you think our kids are going to look at our yearbooks and say the same things?
Nah.
Our kids? Hey, my man's a player. And honestly, I kinda gotta respect it though. And yes, they will. That's how fashion works.
So, how'd you say this trunk helped you?
Well, I'm starting to get the picture on human evolution. This book was published in 1925 by Sir Arthur Keith. And now he was the president of the Royal Anthropological Society of Great Britain.
And the skull?
It was found in 1912. Now, it called Piltdown Man the find of the 20th century. I think it was the New York Times said that it proves the theory of evolution. There were like 500 articles published when they first found this. Then in 1953, they discovered that the skull was a fake.
Are you serious?
Oh yeah. They took chemicals and they aged the skull. They made it look like it was really, really old. And then the jaw is actually from an orangutan. And the guy who discovered it, he actually filed the teeth down and made it look real.
What the heck were scientists thinking?
They were thinking that they were better than dentists. Even dentists at the time were saying that these teeth simply didn't make any sense. We learned from our mistakes and now trust people in other scientific fields to provide accurate information. More importantly though, they're presenting this as if Piltdown Man was simply the peak of scientific achievement at the time. Piltdown Man remained the subject of controversy among the scientific community until its eventual debunking in 1953. We also became more critical of other fossils presented to ensure something like this doesn't happen again, and we know it happened more than once. Charles Dawson, the man who discovered Piltdown Man, had pretty much his entire collection exposed as frauds by later scientists. A link to both the Wikipedia article on Piltdown Man and Charles Dawson will be linked down below if you're interested in further reading.
Have you ever heard of Nebraska Man? Nebraska Man was the first American ape man fossil to be discovered. And Harold Cook found just a tooth, big enough for the New York Times, okay? And then it went viral for back then, and the London News did a whole drawing on it from a single tooth. There's still a picture of him on Wikipedia.
They drew all that based on a tooth?
Yeah, but 10 years later, they discovered out that that tooth was actually from an extinct pig.
No way.
Jesus, more misinformation here than an Alex Jones podcast. Let's see what they got wrong. First, a minor point, not an extinct species of pig, but an extinct species of Tayasuidae, a taxonomic family of quote-unquote New World pigs due to their pig-like features. Close to modern pigs, just not. But let's get on to the more grievous misinformation. The next thing I don't like is the timing. It wasn't 10 years later, it was 5. The tooth was found in 1917 and retracted in 1927, but the tooth was only made public and went viral in 1922. I suspect they intentionally lengthened the timescale to make it look worse. And then there's the worst one of all. The man who had the tooth brought to him to be identified, Henry Fairfield Osborne, was openly critical of the image shown in Illustrated London News, saying it was a figment of the imagination of no scientific value and undoubtedly inaccurate. Funny they mentioned that they found the image on Wikipedia because that's also where I found the quote, which means they either didn't read the article or are intentionally being misleading. Both are completely indefensible. There's one more argument that could kind of be made in their favor. What if the quote on Wikipedia wasn't there when the video was released? How could they be blamed for that? These videos went up in 2016 and were probably recorded around then too based on the camera quality. But fortunately for me, Wikipedia records all edits all the time, and I went back. I went way back, and I found the exact edit where this information was put in. Submitted in 2007 by user Dragonhelm, this quote has been in long enough that missing this quote is a major cock-up. Genesis Apologetics should be ashamed.
Yeah, so Piltdown Man was the popular proof for evolution for 40 years, and Nebraska Man was the popular proof for 10.
Wow, more misinformation. Is this a speedrun or something? We've made it 7 seconds since the last pause. As mentioned earlier, Nebraska Man was only in the public eye for 5 years, not 10. They're parroting utter nonsense. While they did get the number right on Piltdown Man, with 41 years between reporting and retraction, they lied here in a different way, saying that either of them was the quote-unquote popular proof for evolution. For God's sake, pun intended, we had the first Homo erectus fossils back in 1891 known as Java Man. Side note, by the way, they weren't initially classified as Homo erectus. First it was Australopithecus erectus, and then Pithecanthropus erectus, and finally accepted as Homo erectus in 1950. More important to this discussion, however, is that despite Java Man's initial critics, the man who discovered it, Eugene Dubois, argued consistently from 1894 onwards that it was a missing link. Along with the discovery of Pecking Man in 1921 and being a subspecies of Homo erectus pekinensis, and the discovery of Tone Child in 1924 and Australopithecus africanus, which we'll talk about later, these provided great arguments for human-ape common ancestry without invoking Piltdown Man or Nebraska Man.
Makes you wonder about what they're teaching us today.
I'm way ahead of you. Take a look at my little brother's 6th grade history book.
Really? Your brother's book? You have way too much time on your hands. Well, some of these ape men look familiar.
Long lost relatives of yours? No, I'm just kidding, but no, it's because they're in our book as well.
Oh, well, in our book, they say Australopithecus afarensis evolved 3.8 to 3 million years ago. But in the 6th grade book, Australopithecus evolving 4 to 5 million years ago.
And what does this prove? So we found more fossils and gathered more evidence. So what? Of course the evolutionary story is going to change with more evidence. That's how you know it's reliable, because we change with the evidence instead of denying it.
Uh-huh. Now, look at this. This is an old 1951 Life magazine publication.
According to this, Australopithecus lived 1 million to 500,000 years ago. Wow, that's different by a few million years. Mm-hmm. These dates are all over the place.
Surely you know better than to use a 1951 magazine to debunk modern theories of evolution, right guys? Right?
Yeah, well, it gets worse. So this is our biology, the Holt biology book.
Okay.
And it shows Homo habilis as living 1.6 to 1.9 million years ago.
That looks a lot more like 1.6 to 2.4 million years to me, but okay. Pop off, I guess?
But in the 6th grade one, it's 2.4 million years ago.
Then why didn't you show the images of the first textbook? Those images were clearly from the 6th grade one.
So which one's true?
I guess it depends on which class you're in.
So what I'm wondering is if any of these dates are correct.
It looks like today's truth is just tomorrow's fiction. If you look back at all the textbooks, they're all published at about the same time. Take a look at my little brother's 6th grade book. Now this book shows all of the popular fossils today.
Okay, so here we are, Homo sapiens, right?
But check out what came before us.
Homo erectus.
Right, and while he had a human body, evolutionists like to point out that he had a different skull, at least a modern human skull. Now, the journal Science, back in October of 2013, they reported they found skulls in Georgia, like Russia. It shows how different the Homo erectus skulls can look.
Wow, they are so different.
Homo erectus and human skulls can be very similar. In fact, they did a study on 202 modern-day Aborigines, like Australians, on the shape of their skulls, and they found that 14 of the 17 traits were the same on the Aborigines as on the Homo erectus skulls.
I just can't find this study anywhere. Completely unreputable, although yes, many Aborigine skull traits are similar, but not the same to earlier species of hominids. This is actually being used to try and determine where and when Aborigines migrated to Australia.
So it looks like Homo erectus wasn't becoming human, but was already human?
Well, now that just depends on your definition of the word human. Personally, I define humans as any species within the genus Homo, so yeah, I guess so. But they certainly weren't of the same species as us today, so if you count Homo sapien as human, then they were definitely not human, as they wouldn't have been able to produce viable offspring with us.
Exactly. The next ape man back is Homo habilis. Homo means human. So they're trying to make him look more human-like than he really is. So Richard Leakey is a famous evolutionist, and he said, of the several dozen specimens that have been said at one time or another to belong to Homo habilis, at least half of them don't, but there is no consensus as to which 50% should be excluded. No one anthropologist's 50% is quite the same as another's.
How are you going to try and use a paleoanthropologist's quote to try and disprove the field of paleoanthropology? Do you realize how brain-dead that is?
So they can't even really classify which fossils are supposed to go into which category. In fact, some scientists are fighting to have Homo habilis reclassified as Australopithecus.
Yes, because the classification is difficult. Evolution isn't a clearly marked process where it puts in writing on the bones what we should call each specimen. The concept of species doesn't even exist in the animal kingdom. It's really just a bunch of organisms, and some of them can and do mate. So yeah, maybe some Homo habilis fossils are close enough to Homo erectus or Australopithecus afarensis that it's not so clear where they belong. That doesn't mean evolution didn't happen, only that it's hard to draw clear lines in the metaphorical sand.
Which one?
Australopithecus is Lucy.
Oh yeah, I've heard of her.
Yeah. Now, Donald Johanson, 1973, discovered just the shin and the leg bone. Now, the way they line up makes scientists think that she could walk upright. And there's a picture of her.
Wow, there's a lot of her missing.
Hey, at least it's more than a tooth.
It's true.
You want to see the fragments of the skull that they found?
Sure.
All right, wait for it. Booyah.
Wow,
That's what they found.
not that much. Man, there's a lot of skulls in here. Was your grandpa a witch doctor?
No, he was a yard sailor. Now, looky what we have here. We have here a modern bonobo monkey skull, and we have Lucy. So the brown pieces are the actual fragments of Lucy's skull that they found.
Well, they look so alike.
Her brain is only a third the size of a modern human's, about the average chimp brain size, and she only stood about 3.5 feet tall. Take a look at the way that Lucy has been portrayed in like the media, like books and films, online,
Wow,
everywhere.
they really went out of their way to make her look human-like.
Take a look in our other biology book.
Oh, wow. Hey, look at the whites of those eyes. You know, I've been to a lot of different zoos and I've seen a lot of different apes, and each of them have completely brown eyes, and not the eye whites that us humans have. Man, it even looks like she's thinking about something.
Yeah, bananas. I don't think they found any eyeball fossils, but if you wanted to make an ape man look more human, changing the colors of the eye whites in pictures is a good way to do it.
That's true.
Here's a picture of what she probably looked like.
Man, what a difference.
Yeah, well, they do say they have found several complete skeletons of the Australopithecus, though not specifically Lucy. They found around 362 actual specimens from the species Australopithecus, specifically Lucy. However, Charles Oxnard said, the Australopithecines known over the last several decades are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. All this should make us wonder about the usual presentation of human evolution in introductory textbooks.
I thought I'd let that entire clip play before diving in. They talk a lot, and I thought I'd give you guys full context before I make any of my points. First, they argue about artistic interpretations. Sure, we can't really know about Lucy's eye color. Does that matter? That is in no way relevant to primary scientific literature. Moreover, they quote Charles Oxnard, an esteemed professor and expert on subjects like biology and evolutionary biology, to try and gain credence with their fringe pseudoscientific opinions. But there's one fact they gleefully forget to mention. That quote is from 1984 in a book entitled The Order of Man, A Biomathematical Anatomy of the Primates. Charles Oxnard no longer holds the view cited in that quote. They also refer to Australopithecus as a species. This is just damning evidence because Australopithecus isn't a species, it's a genus, and when they say specifically Lucy, I think they're trying to reference the Australopithecus afarensis species. But there's also Australopithecus africanus, Barrel-Ghazali, Anamensis, Boisei, Robustus, and Aethiopithecus. It should be noted that some of these have solid skeletons and others are more speculative based on fragmentary remains. But let's get to the real bad part, the science denial. The claim that isn't just about artistic interpretation or opinion. The idea that Australopithecus afarensis was a knuckle walker, using all four limbs to walk as implied by their realistic interpretation of Lucy, showing her on all fours. This, to me, is disgusting. They are simply lying. Lucy was bipedal, and I can prove it. There are 7 lines of evidence worth reviewing, so let's just get straight into it. There's a concept in biology called the Intermembral Index. Take the length of the entire forelimb, divide it by the length of the entire hind limb, and multiply it by 100. It gives you the ratio of arms to legs, so to speak. For example, humans have an intermembral index of 68 to 70 because our legs are, on average, longer than our arms. This reflects how we primarily use our hind limbs for movement. Chimpanzees, who use their arms for primary movement, have an intermembral index of 108. This is reflective of how they use their arms for primary propulsion, due to their adapted lifestyle in the trees. Now, Australopithecus afarensis, the fossils in question, had a lower intermembral index at 88. This is a kind of midpoint between modern chimpanzees and modern humans, indicative of afarensis using their legs as primary propulsion, but still climbing trees with their arms on a regular basis. Next, let's look at the scapula, for a piece of evidence that indicates Australopithecus afarensis arms were used for climbing, not knuckle walking. There's a spot on the end of the scapula known as the glenoid fossa, where the scapula connects to the humerus. These are different between chimpanzees and humans because a glenoid fossa that points towards a creature's head performs better with your arms over your head, like in conditions such as climbing, as well as the opposite-faced glenoid fossa creating the opposite effect. If we look at Australopithecus afarensis, the glenoid fossa is clearly pointed towards the cranium, massive evidence that they had their arms consistently raised over their heads instead of on the floor, which means Australopithecus afarensis was arboreal and bipedal, not quadrupedal. Third, we will be looking at arguably the most famous and strongest piece of evidence for Australopithecus afarensis bipedalism, her pelvic bones. The pelvic bones in Australopithecus afarensis bear a striking resemblance to Homo sapien pelvic bones, being short, broad, and curved forward. If we compare it to the chimpanzee, we see the chimpanzee has tall, flat, and narrow pelvic blades. This is specifically relevant to bipedalism with the way it modifies how the gluteal muscles attach to the pelvic bones. For both humans and chimpanzees, the muscle attaches to the iliac crest, a spot on the pelvic bone, and the femur's greater trochanter, a spot at the top of the femur. With the chimpanzee, these flat pelvic blades cause the muscle to extend backward at the hip, helping the legs move forward and backward for front-to-back quadrupedal movement. In humans and Australopithecus afarensis, these curved pelvic blades pull the muscle to the side of the body, pulling legs at the hip. This helps a lot in balancing and maintaining support during bipedal movement and preventing collapse. We'll move up the body now to the sacrum, plural sacra. In Homo sapien and Australopithecus afarensis, these sacra are shorter and wider in comparison to that of the chimpanzee. A wider sacrum positions itself over the hip joints, alleviating the stress of all that body weight on the pelvic bones, whereas chimpanzees don't really have this issue. In fact, human sacra have to carry so much weight, we have a larger sacra than gorillas. Australopithecus afarensis fossils show that the sacra have made clear progress towards the current Homo sapien sacra, being somewhat but not fully expanded. Clear evidence for bipedalism. For the fifth piece of evidence, let's jump back down to the femurs for a second. The femur, aka the thigh bone, slants down and towards the body's midline in Australopithecus afarensis and Homo sapien, allowing for greater support when you're briefly only on one leg during that bipedal motion. This angle is known as a bicondylar angle, and chimpanzees don't have one. Rather, chimpanzees have a straight femur because they don't often need this additional support. In fact, if you even just type in bicondylar angle into Google, the top result is a PubMed article, linked in the description down below, entitled Development of the Femoral Bicondylar Angle in Hominid Bipedalism. And I'm quoting from the abstract here, the presence of a femoral bicondylar angle in Australopithecus afarensis indicates that these 3.5 million year old hominids were bipedal. And now we're going to look at the sixth piece of evidence, and the final piece of evidence about bone structure. Looking at the feet, the toes of a chimpanzee are heavily curved to help their feet grip while climbing. juxtaposed by human toes, which are far shorter and straighter to help with bipedal propulsion. Australopithecus afarensis toes are somewhere in between, indicating that while bipedal, climbing was still a major part of the Australopithecus afarensis lifestyle, probably to help escape predators and find food. One more piece of evidence that I will display remains, but this isn't really a piece of evidence specifically, more like a lack of evidence, of handprints. You see, the Laetoli site is an area in Tanzania. Site G of the Laetoli site has very famous footprints of early bipedal hominids known as the Laetoli footprints. Australopithecus afarensis are commonly attributed to having made these footprints, but there's a distinct lack of handprints in the area, and that has become a noticeable piece of evidence in the support of bipedal evolution. And by the way, Australopithecus afarensis isn't even the first species to be bipedal. Ardipithecus ramidus showed the first bipedal traits and predates Australopithecus afarensis by about 600,000 years. So, as I've made clear, Genesis Apologetics' depiction of Australopithecus afarensis as quadrupedal is an absolutely disgusting piece of science denial on their part. Let's see if they live up to that name, because they have a lot of apologizing to do.
Well, now you understand why I've been digging through this chest. I mean, really, the way it looks is that Lucy's just an extinct ape.
I'm kind of feeling angry. Like I've been duped.
Same thing with Neanderthals. Check out these illustrations that came out after they started finding Neanderthal fossils. Check this one out. This was published in the Illustrated London News about 100 years ago.
Whoa. Okay, that's pretty brutish.
Now, do you want to know what they think he looks like now?
Sure. Wow.
Just recently, scientists have discovered that Neanderthals buried their dead. They worked with tools, they wore makeup, they controlled fire, and they even found in a cave in Israel that Neanderthals and humans were living together and building families together. And at other places as well.
This has been known for a long time, and they're acting as if any of these are distinct characteristics. For example, we have strong evidence that Homo erectus controlled fire beginning 1 million years ago, and effectively utilizing stone tools is one of the things that defines the Homo genus. How the fuck could they not use tools? It's also quite obvious that our depictions of the species would change over time as we gather more information. For example, we now know what time periods Homo Neanderthalensis would have survived, so we can estimate how human-like they might have appeared, how hairless they were, etc.
Okay, you know what? That settles it. That settles it. If they can live together, and if they have children together, then Neanderthals are just humans, but the difference is that their appearance varies.
Not really. This is a little too complicated for me to go into right now, but there are significant genetic differences between Homo Neanderthalensis and Homo sapien. The assertion that they're just humans is also kind of dumb because, as I mentioned before, in a lot of scientific circles, human just means of the genus Homo. So yeah, they are, that's a meaningless statement though.
Just like different people groups today can vary. So either these fossils are completely human or completely ape with nothing in between.
Jesus, a black and white fallacy if I've ever seen one. I have demonstrated multiple times throughout this response how fossils we've found show a clear trend towards Homo sapien without being entirely ape or entirely human. Genesis Apologetics is nothing but blatant science denial, incompetence disguised through confidence. They should be ashamed.
Now, a specimen is basically any piece of bone, including teeth, that they find. All the specimens from all the different ape men that they've actually found, you can fit them in the back of a small pickup truck.
Are you serious?
Dead serious.
Here we go. Nothing funny. Dickens left.
Not only is that not relevant, I would dispute whether or not that's even true. Below I have linked an incredibly long wiki article with every documented human evolution fossil broken up by time period, starting at late Miocene, then Pliocene, Pleistocene, and finally Holocene period. It's quite comprehensive, and each fossil links to its own wiki page.
Now, if our textbooks won't address the new evidence, what does the Bible say? Man was created on the sixth day, in God's image, out of dirt, and God breathed life into him.
And 1 Corinthians 15:39 says, all flesh is not the same kind of flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of man, another flesh of animals, another of fish, and another of birds.
Well then I guess the authors of the Bible missed the class on taxonomy.
That sums it up pretty nicely.
Yep.
So, what'd you think of Grandpa's chest?
I thought it was amazing.
Me too. And we learned that just like a style can go out of fashion, the popular ape men theories and their fossils do the same thing. And while their theory keeps changing, God's word never does.
Because those who follow the Bible literally will just deny evidence, whereas science incorporates it.
Kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
Kinda? Not really. Although I guess I did learn a lot about Australopithecus afarensis when I wrote this. Pretty cool, I'd say. If you've made it all the way to the end here, it would be a massive help if you could like and subscribe if you haven't already. Sources, as always, are in the description down below. Join me next time where we watch Genesis Apologetics video on vestigial structures. A friend of mine has already seen it and warned me it's utter bullshit, so I'm sure we'll have good fun with that one. See you next time.
It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it. Not this time. No, not this time. It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened. It never happened. This one was invented by a writer. Not this time. It never happened. It's false. It never happened. It's a fake. It's fiction. It's an urban legend that never happened. No way. We got you. Not a chance. Not this time. It never happened. It never happened. We made this one up. It's fiction. We made up this one. We made it up. Not this time. Wrong. Not this time. Not this time. You're wrong. Not this time. It never happened.